I'm trying to change my name, but I will work on that.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is the next in the series of the Digital Technologies for COVID-19 webinar. We have two speakers today, and I'll introduce our first speaker. So I'm Craig Knobloch, one of the webinar co-hosts. And our first speaker is John Heidemann, who is a principal scientist at the USC Information Science Institute. He's also a research professor in computer science. And at ISI, he leads the analysis of network traffic lab, which is basically studying how to observe and analyze internet topology and traffic to improve network reliability, security, and protocols in critical services. Welcome to John, and I'll turn it over to him to start with his talk.
Okay, thank you. Oh no, okay, here we are. So you want me to go screen share?
Yep. We're not seeing anything yet.
Yeah, it's coming. It's just slow.
Okay.
Do you see it now?
Not yet.
Oh, it didn't. Hold on. It didn't let me pick. There it goes. Okay. Do you have it up now?
Yep, we see it.
Okay, thank you. Hi, so my name is John Heidemann. As Craig said, I'm a researcher at Information Sciences Institute in the networking division. I'm going to be talking to you about a new NSF project called Minsk. And this is joint work with Yuri Pradkin, a staff person who works with me, and then 3 students, Guillermo Baltra, Asma Inyat, and Xiao Song. And I should, just as a warning, this is a very new project because it started after this COVID thing. So these are early results, but I'm happy to share them with you. So we have this question. We all have this question right now, which is, how is the world reacting to COVID-19? And we've seen what happened in Wuhan, which went down on lockdown in January and actually came out of lockdown just recently. We've seen a more varied reaction in the United States as responses have varied by state and local government. But it's been pretty drastic, and not just in the United States, but around the world. There's been all kinds of reactions, and as people try to get a handle on what's going on. And one of the real challenges with this virus is that the reactions have varied across the country and across different locations. And that's varied partly because different governments have different local circumstances. That's also varied because people have different feelings about this in different parts of the country. And so we've seen some protests, for example, in different parts of the United States. And then the final uncertainty about this is, there are countries where we don't necessarily know what's going on, right? There have been questions in China about what really happened around Wuhan, how many people were really sick, and we don't necessarily know one way or the other. And we certainly don't know what's going on in, say, all parts of South America, where there are many different governments and reporting is not always as good as in other parts of the world. So the research question that we started out with was this question of how can we evaluate how the world is responding to COVID-19? And in particular, are there ways we can do this centrally? We can make observations from one place, and can we do this globally? Can we see what's going on in the world? And so that's our goal, right? How can we judge? And our goal is to be able to measure this directly and not just depend on news reports or government reports, but we want to know what's really happening on the ground. So that's our challenge. Now, it happens to be that my work's been measuring the internet for a really long time. And so more than 10 years ago, we did some of the first scans of the IPv4 internet. So, you're familiar with the IP internet. You may have a home router at 10.0.0.1 or something. Well, we scanned the whole thing, star, and we produced maps like you can see on the left. And this is a map of the whole IPv4 internet. There's 4 billion addresses there. And the greener parts are parts of the internet that respond to us. The darker parts are parts that don't seem to have computers that respond. And we've watched the internet slowly get greener and greener over the years as internet use has grown. And you can see we can map parts of it to different parts of the world and stuff like that. There's all kinds of stuff we can do here. And in fact, one of the things we can do, we observed that when you're probing the entire internet, you can actually see parts of the internet drop on and off. And so one of the very useful aspects of this is when hurricanes hit the United States, like Hurricane Harvey, as you can see at the bottom of this slide, we could actually see the internet fail as power lines blew down and people lost internet at home. And then we could see it come back as people restored service. And so these two pictures, the left is just before landfall of Hurricane Harvey, and then the right is just after landfall, I guess an hour later. And you could see the size of the circles or the number of networks that are down in that geographic region. And the color of the circle is the percentage of networks that are down. So particularly in these rural counties, right where the Hurricane I had hit, there was a large percentage of networks that were down. And so by watching the internet and by seeing people's home networks go down and come back, we could actually see the evolution of how this hurricane affected Texas. And so that's a really neat opportunity and a really neat and a really important capability, because if you remember, there's always a lot of uncertainty around what happens during a disaster like a hurricane. So one other thing, which was a lot more fun, we were analyzing our outage data, which our outage data is 24/7, measured every 11 minutes for about 5 million networks. And one thing we noticed is we can actually see the internet go to sleep. And so there's a web page, you can see the link on this. And if you really want the animation, you have to go to the web page because my Zoom is not fast enough. But this is the animation that you can see on the web page. And this is a picture of the globe. You can see the day-night cycles. And what we've done is colored the parts of the globe that have the internet. And it's either red if there are more addresses that are active, or blue if there are fewer addresses than average for that particular region. And I'm not going to really run the animation because Zoom doesn't keep up, at least with my computer. But what you can see is if I pause it, just after nightfall, things are red in India in this case, because people are using the internet in the evening, in the early evening hours. And then if I run it a little bit further, in early morning, so now it's just before dawn, you can see India is now blue because everybody goes to sleep at 3 a.m., or at least most people go to sleep. And so the really neat thing we can see here is over the course of the day, we can see the internet go to sleep and wake up. Or I should say, at least in India and China and South America, we can see that, because in the United States and Europe, it's always white because we always keep our modems on all the time. And we're seeing the modem at the edge of your home. So we did that for fun because, you know, it's cool to watch the internet go to sleep. But that has pertinence to COVID, because if we can watch the internet wake up and go to sleep, we can also, we think, watch the internet work from home or study from home. And one of the huge changes COVID has brought us is I'm at home, right? You can't tell because this is ISI, but you can see home over here. And it's really important for us to understand how the internet is behaving and how people are behaving around the world over time. And so that's our research goal. So to state that more technically, we have outage data from a system we call Trinocular. It scans the 5 million networks every 11 minutes. And we've been running this for several years now. Our goal in this research project is to reanalyze this to try to make sense of what's happening in COVID-19. And so the neat thing is we have this global viewpoint and this global data. The challenge is that our data is not designed for this. We're reusing existing data. And so that brings some challenges because it's not as frequent as it would be if we had built a purpose-built system just to detect people working from home. But I think we have some very promising data, and we're just getting started in this. The other thing which I should mention is, although our primary data source is this scanning information, we're also planning to compare our data to traffic data from our colleagues in Colorado as a way to validate our results. So we're looking at multiple data sources because we care very much about the science and getting a definitive answer to our question. So as I said, this project has been going for about a month and is very early, but I wanted to share two early results with you. So this is early results from University of Southern California. And in this graph, you can see three lines. Each line is a network, a /24, which means it's like 1.2.3. So 256 addresses we're scanning. And I want to start by looking at this blue line at the top. So what we noticed is the blue line is up here at 120 addresses, and it changes over the course of the day, but it's pretty consistent. And then all of a sudden it dropped off, which happens to be just about the time USC went on work from home on middle of March. And so we looked into that, and we actually, because this is USC, we could talk to the network operators. And it turns out this is USC's virtual private network. These are the things we're calling into. And it turns out it dropped off because they shut down the old virtual private network and built a new, bigger virtual private network because they knew everybody was going to be at home. So what we saw here is the old virtual private network being shut down. And so that was neat. That was a true thing that changed as a response to COVID. We didn't know about it ahead of time. We just saw it as something in our data that looked funny. So the other two networks I want to show are these lines at the bottom. There are two, one's purple and the other's green. And in each one, you can see it's like a little line with a bunch of little bumps in it. And if you count very closely, like where my cursor is on February 6th, you can see there's 5 bumps there. So, and then there's a little gap, and then there's 4 bumps, and then there's 5 bumps. So if you remember, in the middle of February is when we had President's Day. So it turns out these 5 bumps correspond to the work week for the week before President's Day. And there are 4 bumps in this week because President's Day was a Monday that we were all not working from home. And so what these bumps are is the workday and people bringing computers into work, plugging them in, laptops probably, and then taking them home at night. And we can see that very clearly, and we can see that in 2 different networks at ISI. These 2 different lines are 2 different networks. And so that's a very powerful piece of information because it shows us we can see people working. And then, of course, we can see people not working, or at least not working at ISI, people working from home, because this diurnal trend, this daily behavior, stops after work from home started. So that's the kind of signals we're looking for that show people going home. We also expect to see similar signals as people in their home networks turn things on at home. So this is data from USC that I wanted to share with you, and this is what we had a month ago. The other results I want to share from you are very recent work by Xiao, a student working on this with me. And these are results that we discovered after this project started, and these are just results from around the world. And so I have 2 graphs on this picture. One is from Milan, Italy. This is University of Milano, and the other is from Wuhan, China. And so Milan, we see the same kind of thing we saw at ISI. The signal is bigger. It goes 50 addresses, but you can again see the very strong diurnal trend, 5 days on and 2 days off. And you can see 2 changes in that trend. Lockdown in northern Italy, lockdown in Lombardy, I believe, followed by lockdown all of northern Italy. And those both reduce the amount of diurnal signal. So that's one example of something we discovered after this happened. The other is Wuhan. So if you recall, China locked down all of Hubei province, January 23rd, very early. You can see this signal here, which is every day of the week, not just weekdays, drops off after that. And then towards the right of this graph on the right, you can see the Wuhan is reopened actually April 8th. But actually, we can see in this data that the network was actually pretty active before that. So this perhaps indicates a gradual reopening that wasn't as widely publicized. So, and the graph at the bottom, the graph at the top is one network. The graph at the bottom is 256 networks averaged together. And so the signal is much smoother, but you can still see daily bumps and stuff. And you can still see trends of changes over time. So these are very early results, but I wanted to give you a flavor of what we're trying to do. We have a lot of work going on. Our biggest goal is to automate the kind of anecdotal results that I've given you into an algorithm that lets us automatically analyze these 5 million networks we're looking at. Another very important question is to understand how the coverage varies around the world, because we know network use is different in different countries, as you saw from the animation about does the internet sleep? And then, as I said, we plan to compare this to network traffic data as a way to validate our active probing of the internet with a second data source. And so that's just a flavor of where we are. I encourage folks who are interested to watch our blog, where we'll post updates as we go, or contact me. I should put my address. My address was on the first slide. So anyway, that was my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you, John. So people can post questions in the Q&A and I'll read the questions. And while we're waiting to see if people have posted questions, let me start with a question. So this is really fascinating. Thanks for the talk, John.
Sure.
I'm wondering, so, I mean, the data you showed in terms about Wuhan and Italy, so is it, can we extrapolate this? So you can basically take any part of the world and at different levels of sort of granularity, you can take a country or you can take cities within a given country and do a similar kind of things, or are there issues in different places?
Yeah, so one of the research questions I mentioned is understanding how sensitive this is to different parts of the world. And we do have global data. I didn't show a graph, but I've looked at graphs of coverage globally. And our plan is definitely to look at all the cities around the world. And I think an open question is how different cities behave differently. So the United States, we know, is influenced by the federal telecommunications policies, which mandate always on internet. So that's why your cable modem is always on in your home and you can just use the internet whenever you want. But other countries have different telecommunications policies, and that shows up in our data and will influence what we see in different countries. So it's a great question, Craig, and that's one of the research questions we're looking to expand upon.
Okay, great. Okay, we do have another question for you here.
See, I can actually watch the chat window.
How much time approximately is it going to take to get to a full and accurate result?
We're working on that as soon as we can. It's research, so I don't have a definitive answer. But you know, I'm hoping in the next month we'll have automatic algorithms and be able to start to give some early results. And then it'll take additional time to validate with the other data sources that I mentioned. So maybe tune in next month and we'll see. I don't know, does the seminar continue in the summer?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Okay, another question. Are you also mapping early use of IPv6 space?
Excellent question. IPv6 is very challenging. Our results are based on active probing. Active probing, our current techniques are specific to IPv4. So the short answer is no, we're not currently able to apply these techniques to IPv6. And so IPv6 is one reason we want to bring in the external data sources like traffic information, because that is a technique that works for IPv6. So IPv6, handling IPv6 properly is an important research question that I would love to get to, but will be outside the scope of this immediate NSF project, but certainly is a long-term goal of ours. Great question.
I have a question, which is,
Sure.
I mean, just a following question to that, which is, I don't know that much about the networking side of things in terms of IPv6 versus IPv4. What do you have to do differently in IPv6 to work?
So the answers, the short answer is really simple, right? IPv4 is 32 bits, right? 1.2.3.4. And my gigahertz computer can count to 2 to the 32 in 4 seconds, right? At one tick at 1 gigahertz. IPv6 is 2 to the 128.
Mm.
So 2 to the 128 is a lot bigger than 2 to the 32.
Mm.
We have a picture of the internet on the wall at ISI, and if you made the same scale of IPv6, it would be like the size of the Earth or something. I don't know.
Got it.
So we need to use fundamentally different techniques, not solely based on active probing, to deal with IPv6, because 2 to the 128 is just a fundamentally intractably large number. We've worked on these. In fact, the paper that I mentioned on the very last slide was a first step in that, trying to look at what we can see in passive data and how good the coverage is of that. But it's a fascinating and open research question. So
Okay, good,
it's
thanks.
something I really want to engage with.
Great. Okay, next question is, how do you collect the data? Is BRoot the primary source or something else?
So that's a good question. So the data I described is from Trinocular. So Trinocular is our outage detection system. If you go to outage.ant.isi.edu, you can see the output of Trinocular. Trinocular uses active probing, so it has nothing to do with BRoot, which is a name system that ISI runs. Basically, Trinocular is 6 sites around the world. So Los Angeles, Colorado, Washington, D.C., Tokyo, near Tokyo, Japan, Netherlands, and Greece. Each site is probing 5 million networks every 11 minutes. So it's, it's a lot of traffic. And then we bring that data back to ISI and integrate the results in near real time. So this is active probing data from multiple physical locations. So does that answer the question?
I think so.
Okay, good.
Next question is, what is the main objective of this research, and how is it different from similar studies working on analyzing global internet traffic?
Yeah, so the challenge everybody was worried about in the first weeks of work from home was, oh my goodness, is the internet going to melt down? Is there too much traffic? And if you remember, Google made YouTube in Europe go slower or have lower resolution video. That's about traffic. And those were good questions. And I think the internet has done amazingly well as a result of that work. And I think YouTube is now running at full speed in Europe, I've heard. My work is not about traffic. My work is about observing addresses to try to estimate work from home. And we could estimate work from home from traffic. And in fact, that's one of the reasons we want the passive data that I mentioned, the passive traffic data, to compare to our work. But traffic data is fundamentally limited because if I look at traffic, say at USC, I know a lot about what USC does, but I know very little about what Chile is doing. I know very little about what's happening in Africa or Australia. And if you want a global view, I think it's really important to use, where you can, to use active probing mechanisms, because there you control what you're looking at and how much you look at it. As opposed to passive methods, which are always going to be constrained by their vantage point. So that's kind of the trade-off here, and the role of a global vision and where we're going with that.
So, John, just so I understand, let me ask a follow-up question, which is, if everyone switched, if everyone immediately went from work and went home and switched to working from home, and they were all working from home, would you see exactly the same patterns in the data?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably not exactly the same patterns, because the kind of networks people have at home are different than the kind of networks people have at work. So one thing I mentioned, most of us have a cable modem or a box from the telephone at home. That box is sitting at the edge of your home network and is talking to their computers, and your home, my laptop right now, is talking to that box. So everything in my home is hidden behind that box. It's called a network address translation box, or a home router is what it's usually called. At home, when I scan your home network, when I scan the public internet, I should say, and happen to cross the public IPs that are used by your home network, I see your home router and I see that that router's on. That's different from the ISI networks that I saw, where because ISI's network currently is on the public internet, I can actually see individual people's laptops on the network come and go.
I see.
So what I see depends on how people have configured their networks. And ISI right now is fairly open. USC is fairly open. We can see USC's wireless network and some parts of that. But lots of the network, and particularly as IPv4 gets more and more used, becomes more and more hidden behind other devices. So it's really an open question of how much we will see exactly. We know we see stuff. We know we found Milan, University of Milan. But I can't quite answer the how good is our coverage and how does it vary from place to place. That's one of the research questions we're engaging with.
I see. Well, thanks.
Sorry, it's a very complicated question.
Yeah,
it's a great
thanks.
question.
It is really interesting. A really interesting talk. Thank you for
Great.
joining us today.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate it. And I'm now going to turn things over to my co-host, Bhaskar
Okay.
Krishnamurthy. Take things from here.
Thank you, Craig. And thank you, John. That was a very insightful presentation. So, well, now for something a little different. The first person from industry in our webinar series on digital technologies for COVID-19. Joining us from just Long Beach, California, not that far, is Animesh Pathak. Animesh is actually a Viterbi alum. He's a PhD graduate from the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. He has been also a research scientist at INRIA in Paris, and is currently the head of R&D and engineering at MyKarma, which is a automotive business software company. And he'll be telling us about how, if from kind of a business perspective, they've had to address kind of new concerns from their customers that are kind of unique to this unusual time that we're all in. So I'm really looking forward to your industry perspective here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Bhaskar. Hi, everybody.
Oh, I think not
Hello.
hearing your audio for some reason.
Hello.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Bhaskar. John, thank you for the great talk. Very good context. As Bhaskar said, this will be a slightly different talk from the pattern we have seen so far in this great series. We've seen a lot of research on how it applies, I would say, to the core of COVID in terms of the disease itself and how the pandemic spreads. I figured it'll be nice for the audience to get a little more context on secondary, perhaps tertiary, but still very important aspects of this disease. Specifically, what is the perspective from the industry and the economy? So I'll try to share some of the experiences we have had over the past couple of months and where this is going in the near future. I'll start with a quick primer of the automotive dealership industry in the US. For those of you who are not deeply aware of this, we'll talk a little more about COVID-19 and what changed, how new business processes had to be evolved in the dealership software industry and dealership industry as primary. We'll then go a little deeper into the case study in responding to these challenges and the upcoming difficult problems. But before we start, a quick word about doing cool stuff that matters. This is a quote that I came across when I was a postdoc back at INRIA. It was a Google poster, I think, and it really inspired me. It was a good way to combine difficulty and impact in a single phrase. And this is something I've been aspiring to for some time now. And when I left academia from my previous life and 5 years ago moved to Long Beach and joined the industry, about a month later, my wife and I were having a conversation, and she asked me, hey, weren't you working on these nice, impactful things back on like smart cities and helping homeless people use smart displays at bus stations and stuff like this? What are you doing right now? Aren't you helping some guy who has a car get their car repaired? Like, that's okay, but doesn't sound like as impactful as before. And that gave me some thought. I was like, that is interesting. Let me think about this, because so far I've been pretty happy working with a bunch of people whom I like, friends of mine who started the company, and working on some pretty difficult problems. But what is the impact? thankfully, our company has a very strong policy. At My Karma, everybody needs to go and visit our customers. Our customers are automotive dealerships. So I went on a couple of trips, went to dealerships, met the people there who were servicing the vehicles using our software. And I came back to my wife and I shared with her that I think I have figured out that my work not only helps the vehicle owner get their vehicles repaired smoothly, but perhaps more importantly, it enables the more middle-class person who's repairing the vehicle earn a better living and take more money back to their families. Because a lot of the people who work at dealerships actually work on commissions. And as many of you may have stories of how automotive personnel are not very honest because they'll try to sell you stuff you don't need, I realize that a good amount of that unfortunately happens because of lack of transparency. And there's many good people who are trying to do a good job. And I was like, you know what, this matters and it's valuable. But this was still pretty early. And what I'll show you now hopefully drives home the point of how much more it matters compared to what I thought it did. Overall, in the US, there are 16.6K automotive dealerships who sell new cars, 2.4 million jobs, out of which 1.134 directly employed by dealerships, about 68 employees per store, and about $1 trillion total in just sales. We're not even counting the service side of the industry. But suffice to say, a pretty big sector of the US economy. Classic customer interactions as they have been happening, as many of you here who have gotten their vehicle service would know. You go to a dealership, you drop your vehicle off. In many cases, you just hang out there if it's just an oil change or something, or they give you a loaner vehicle that you take and you drive home. And then when the service is complete, you come back in, you pay whatever is due, you get your car back and you go home. This classic pattern has been true for decades now. And a few dealerships had started trying out new mechanisms, but by and large, this is how experiences were. That's at least how we saw. However, when the pandemic started, life changed a little. And this is a clip from an interview I conducted of Steve Simmons. Steve is the service manager at Mercedes-Benz of Long Beach, one of our earliest clients, one of our very active clients who try all the new cool stuff. But perhaps more importantly, he's ultimately a business person and he runs a team. Let's hear quickly what he has to say.
Well, we were growing amazingly. We were in January, we had a record in gross profit. We did 1.286 in January, which is a store record. We're doing probably anywhere from 100 to 125 cars a day on average in the service drive. So yeah, things were going good. We were doing very well. And then the pandemic hit. In March, you know, toward the end of the month, it started to fall off. And then starting the month of April, it just continued to decline. We continued to reduce staff and do the things that we needed to do to try and ride the thing out. It continued to decline. And at one point, we got down to less than 20 appointments. And so we were finishing the days with like 20 cars done. And that was a problem.
As you probably heard, it was not just a financial impact, but also a personal one. He, as a leader, had to have the difficult conversation of laying his team members off. And that's definitely something strong. And when we ran the numbers across our population of dealers, we realized that this was not unique to only one store. This is a graph of the number of repair orders performed on a monthly basis at dealerships on average from more than 900 stores that we service. And we saw a 36% drop in the number of repair orders. And that's a significant drop. It's perhaps even more intense when you realize that vehicle service is where a dealership actually has its profit margins, which it uses to pay its staff. Vehicle sales is not where the profit is. It's like selling razor blades. The first one is much cheaper, but the subsequent service is where the revenue is. And this 36% drop unfortunately translates to real layoffs of people losing jobs. And this was heartbreaking in some ways. We got many phone calls from our customers, and they were all trying out new mechanisms to revive business. And the major pivot we saw happening, and of course it's obvious in hindsight, is to use a pickup and delivery system of some sort, where the dealership personnel would simply come to your home, pick up your vehicle, bring it back to their store, repair it, and drop it back off. Of course, they will guarantee that they sanitize the vehicle properly, but it totally takes away your responsibility as a customer to come to the store, hang out with people, touch surfaces, and so on and so forth. This would be powered by some kind of an app that the driver would use, the way an Uber driver uses, whereas the customers will be able to just use a web browser to track the driver and see the progress. And this was an interesting idea by itself, but it really gained popularity during the time of COVID-19. Here's Steve again with an after piece.
Kind of did the math backwards and figured we needed to do at least 33 cars a day to break even. So that was our big goal. We got to somehow get 33 cars in here a day, and how are we going to do that? So that's how we started approaching it, and my karma just kind of fell in place with all of these tools to allow us to do that. Up in delivery, the scheduler, the leads. We finished the month of April at $650,000 gross profit. We were doing a little over 40 appointments a day by the end of the month. This month so far, we are averaging around 52, 53 appointments a day.
As you can see, using his vision of getting out to customers, offering pickup and delivery, Steve was able to not only meet his 33 requirement, but actually exceed it and reach about 53 per day. What this translates to is that he was actually able to rehire a bunch of his staff who he had to furlough before that. And that's a major impact. In fact, what we saw was increasingly dealerships were trying out a new wheel of good fortune, if you will, where focusing on a foundation of strong communication with customers using multiple channels, they were able to basically empower the entire life cycle, where a customer would call into the BDC or a call center of a dealership, or they would call them out and say, hey, Mr. Customer, would you like to bring your vehicle in for recalls? Actually, you don't even have to bring it in. We'll come to your home, pick up your car, bring it in for service. And then they would make an appointment either online or by talking to somebody, but the vehicle crucially would be picked up at their home. Videos would be made at the customer's home, so they would have a record of the vehicle's conditions before. Videos would be made to have a multi-point inspection, to send like a shopping cart to the customer so they could see an approved repair from home without having to talk to anybody in person. Online payments would further empower this particular cycle, and finally, the vehicle would get delivered to the customer. The staff would then reach out to the customer in case they have any declined services, and of course, reporting would power the managers to understand how their team is adjusting to this new process. And we increasingly saw this being adopted by multiple stores. In fact, the graph I showed you earlier, it started pointing up. As you would know, this is a 2-month thing. This is month of May to date. We have been able to see that the reduction of 36% is now down to only a 22% reduction from the basis that we had from January. The graphs are trending upwards. May is still not completely over. This gives us hope. It gives us hope that we are able to actually make a dent in terms of the dealerships actually being able to get some business back, keep their team members employed. The next step in this story is mobile service. We have been working closely with a large auto manufacturer in the country to enable this vision of mobile service. And this is extremely early days of this. The system itself is pretty new. Few dealers are starting to use it in right earnest. But this data point is actually from yesterday. We were having a meeting, and my product team lead, who was talking to one of the dealers, was informed that they were able to earn an additional 7.4K of monthly gross profit from mobile service out in Florida. And the idea here was that they were able to actually reach out to customers and their homes and provide them basic services. As you can see in the picture over here, there's a van in which a technician can reach to your home and perform service. And that's income again, which was unrealized. And this was service that they were able to provide to their customers in a nice, clean, and transparent manner. Now, the impact of this new reality to the software industry, and my team in particular, can perhaps be illustrated by the Leads tab story. This is a screenshot of the My Karma Leads tab. As you can see, we have a whole bunch of functionality up top here. But the Leads tab especially gives the agents at a store who are trying to reach out to customers potential leads, where they say, hey, for so-and-so customer with vehicle VIN so-and-so, they have the following potential repairs pending. And more likely than not, they could be free repairs. They could either be like a simple service reminder, they could be a Takata airbag recall. The idea here is they could use whatever communication tools that they would like. They could text the customer, email the customer, or call the customer. Of course, the system would let them know if they cannot text a customer in certain cases. But they'll be able to reach out to the customer and hopefully earn some business. Now, this lead stab was part of the overall mobile service vision, and we were on track for finishing it up. In fact, on March 1st, we were on track to deliver mobile service mid-April, and work was progressing just fine. Those of you who work in the software industry and have built software would realize that we had defined all the pieces and how we put them together and deliver stuff on time. And then suddenly we were asked mid-March to deliver this by March 26th. Because guess what? Our customers had an urgent need to get these leads and follow up with them and get business in. And my team, kudos to them, some of whom may actually be on the webinar, thank you guys, they were able to pivot very rapidly and not only deliver the leads tab before the overall mobile service tab came out but fully matured, but then also delivered the mobile service functionality on time. And this was an interesting experience just to understand how a medical pandemic impacts a business and in turn impacts a software company. We're a small company, around 100 people, nothing very big. And this is where it's very important for us to flex with our customers. The first thing we had to worry about was cost cutting, because we got several requests from our customers that their business was either severely reduced or in some cases actually closed down. The city of Montreal closed a lot of business. Manhattan, for example, was fully closed. And we have customers over there. They reached out to us and we actually helped discount their costs by giving them rather deep discounts in these very, very crazy months. Of course, we had to figure out a way to save our costs as well. And the team had to swing into action. We were able to get a 30% reduction in software costs. It helped defray the impacts. And perhaps more crucially, internally speaking, it really helped us not having to resort to laying off our own team members. If you're following the news, you of course know that layoffs are going pretty crazy right now in the software industry in the US. And we are very happy and blessed that we didn't have to do this. The other interesting side effect of that was that some of our modules actually got much more focus prematurely. Things which were still in early prototypes or we were rolling them out suddenly got a lot of focus. Pickup and delivery, as I mentioned, became extremely important. So we had to work hard on enhancing the reliability of the module itself, especially because you had to worry about delay tolerant networking in certain ways, because the videos were now being performed out in the field much more than earlier, because the videos could be taken at the dealership slot where you had strong Wi-Fi. And now you had a driver on their 4G or 3G network getting a video recorded. We also realized on a different product for the shared inbox for the BDC, which is the business development center of a dealership, our focus initially was on inbound traffic. And we realized that because the BDC was trying so hard to reach out to customers to get new business in, they were newly found use cases, and we have been releasing code on a weekly basis to quickly catch up to those requirements. On the payment side, we realized a much stronger increased focus on online and contactless payments, as you would expect, of course. That involved writing new code to make sure that we can have reliable integrations working nicely in the system. Overall, if we take a step back and look at the changing business landscape, certain patterns become obvious. 2010 roughly is when we began. Normal service would be at a dealership, and that's all you would see. But then you can start adding dimensions and asking questions. The first of them would be, where is the customer during the service operation? Well, about 2 years ago, we started working on the pickup and delivery system where the customer could be at home and you could do this. However, recently we have been thinking of more dimensions. One of them would be, where is the service happening? In this case, if the service happens at the dealership, you could have normal service or pickup and delivery. However, if the service is happening at the customer's home and the customer is also at home, that takes us in the spot of mobile service. Of course, a logical question would be, what lives on the top left quadrant of this image? I actually don't know, because I don't know what would be the case where the service happens at the customer's home, whereas the customer happens to be the dealership. Not sure what that would mean, but this opens up all kinds of interesting use cases to explore. And on a parallel basis, it requires models which can support these different use cases as the industry evolves in trying out new patterns. This is where those of you who are students, if you are being taught to model things clearly, please do, because it pays you back later. In fact, if you look at more dimensions, another natural dimension to ask is, which department is being serviced over here in terms of businesses? What would it mean to buy a car from home? Increasingly, we are seeing ads of being able to purchase a vehicle from your home. Those are early cases. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves and how we can reuse some of the existing algorithms and techniques and software that we have built. But the story does not end there. There's at least two other dimensions you can look at. The first, which is immediately a result of COVID, is what level of contact? How do you move from full contact to completely touchless? Can you make sure, for example, that a customer can actually sign an invoice from their phone as opposed to even using your touchscreen to scribble on it when they get a vehicle from you as a loaner? On a different note, which industry are you trying to support? Automotive, of course, is where we started, and that's what we understand. But we have recently been thinking of applicability of our skills and of our software to other domains. Recently, we got a phone call from a restaurant owner who wanted to enable his taco trucks using our system. We had a hackathon last year in which our team members use our APIs to actually build a pet grooming system, and they call it My Dogma, very cutely. And the idea here was that the patterns such as video inspections and picking up and delivering and online payments and customer communications, they also apply to other kinds of services. My friends and family have been asking me for a long time to help in improving the healthcare interaction process. There's HIPAA laws to be worried about, but maybe we'll figure out some interesting things. So these dimensions are definitely worth exploring. And it's just important to note these things. We so far have a pretty decent track record. We have sent and received 146.4 million text messages, processed $6.9 billion worth of payments. We've made 165.8 K trips, out of which 50,000 were made since March 12th. So you can see that a lot of the traffic is very recent. These patterns are very new. We have about 2 million videos of vehicles inspected for damages. And this track record, all these numbers, they also open an opportunity for all of us. Challenges such as classification of text. In that domain, there's two business cases we are aware of already. The first is where if a customer has texted in and it's a message which simply says thumbs up emoji, then nobody's waiting for a response. However, the customer says, how's my car doing? Managers would like to know that somebody is responding. Similarly, we have a legal implication of a customer who replies saying, do not text me anymore without using the keyword stop. How do you detect that while having very few false positives and not opting out customers who are just saying, I will stop by this afternoon? Interesting problems that we have been looking at for the past years, but they become much more important now. There's problems in the computer vision direction about detection of damages recorded by staff drivers. There's reputation and incentive management, because to tune these algorithms, the only way you do that is through crowdsourcing. We have tried off-the-shelf AI, it does not work. And that is where systems like this become very valuable. This is a screenshot of the MyCarMap Play system, where the idea is to encourage our own users to play some crowdsourcing games. For example, in this case, you can, as a human, can help us note that the second message does not have the notion of I will be coming by tomorrow, and therefore does not belong to this particular cluster. Of course, there are classic problems of reputation and incentive management that you have to worry about. But I believe there's a fundamentally new field of corporate crowdsourcing in which to date I haven't found any papers, and it can be a very interesting problem space to be solved. And we're already working on some pieces of it. We'll be starting some alphas very soon at some of our dealerships of the system. So far, we've been playing on these games internally. There's, of course, security and access control problems, and finally, some good OR and facility location problems that come in if you're trying to make efficient recommendations for mobile service based on location. Now, something important to understand here is although some of these problems seem pretty classical, they are easy if you are willing to throw a lot of hardware at the problem. Being a small organization, keeping the costs down is also a key driving factor for us. And therefore, it's pretty challenging and interesting to figure out how do you do these things while not spending a lot of money. I'm proud to say that we actually recently had people from AWS try to help us improve our hosting costs, and they were not able to because my team had worked so hard to optimize our use of reserved instances and stuff. So good job, team. Finally, I invite all of you to do cool stuff that matters with us. This is our happy team. There's many more people, of course. We are actively looking for academic collaborators, including Trojans, and summer interns for next year. And my office is in Long Beach, Waterloo, New Delhi. Of course, always open to industrial partnerships. You can reach out to me on my email address, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Thank you very much for your time.
Great talk, Animesh. So let's, as we wait for some other questions, I think one question that rose in my mind when I was listening to you present is, how much of the changes that are happening now that you had to put in place represent kind of a fundamental change in the business process that is likely to be a change that's, let's say, somewhat more permanent, meaning even when we're back from all of this COVID stuff, whenever that happens, the business itself has changed because of the current environment?
That's a very good question, Bhaskar. In fact, as I was extracting clips from my conversation with Steve Simmons, I recognized that we had asked him the same question, saying, hey, how is your business going to change for the long term? And his answer was, I absolutely see pickup and delivery, this whole notion of remote service, staying. It's similar to working from home. Will it be a change or not? There are certain cases where absolutely working from the office makes sense. But increasingly, what will happen is some of these things which were not even considered would become an extremely viable option. I can tell you from my experience having been to dealerships, I remember going to a dealership on the East Coast and talking to the owner of the store. And I was like, you are one of our first stores using pickup and delivery. Why is nobody else using it? Because you are using it. This is 6 months ago or something. And he's like, because nobody else sees it yet. And sure enough, that gentleman was ahead of the curve. Whereas now, once people are used to being like, wait, so I can go to my work and come back and my car can just magically get repaired and be delivered, maybe even at a little cost. But if I don't have to drive through LA traffic, it's worth it. And I think that's the fundamental change that I see happening. Contactless service, again, I think people in general will be much more sensitive to touching surfaces, and any technology, any processes that help remove that would definitely stay.
So on that note, I think the other question that arose for me, you mentioned that you process a lot of payments. And one of the things that's happening with payments, of course, going digital is the rise of maybe cryptocurrencies and stable coins and, systems like Facebook's Libra or others that might be coming up. Do you see changes happening in how people pay for services and cars and so on that you would need to address from a software perspective as well?
I'd say yes and no. On the one hand, I think the fact that people are paying online more and more, even if they're using their Apple Pay, Google Pay, or just their credit cards, that reduces the friction, the psychological friction to going towards something which is more purely online, like a cryptocurrency of sorts. On the other hand, specifically the use of cryptocurrency, I think will have to wait for its wide adoption in general. We have seen a lot of fraud happening at dealerships, especially when people do parts payments. There's lots of drop shipping which happens, unfortunately, in dealerships, where somebody would order a part online sometimes or make a phone call, get the part delivered, but use a fake credit card. So dealers are extremely averse to fraud. In fact, part of what we build is fraud detection systems and giving certain guarantees to dealers. I don't see cryptocurrency happening soon enough. However, the day it happens, it won't take much because the customers will anyways be used to making online payments, and the dealers also would be used to sending requests for online payments.
But it also sounds like you have specific problems that if this new mode helped to address around fraud, for example, that would be a value proposition.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll definitely be a big thing.
Great. Folks, if you have questions, please post them on the Q&A section. The other thing that you talked about near the end is sort of where AI and ML might play a role in all of this. Do you see, so if you had to kind of think about, I don't know what's the right way to put it, but what percentage of your code and software base has the potential to be transformed with more data-driven, machine learning-based approaches?
That's an excellent question, Bhaskar.
Yeah.
So I'd say until a couple of years ago, if you map the percentage of code to percentage of people or the percent of teams, I happen to run both the R&D team and the engineering team at large. Initially, all of our AI efforts were in the R&D team alone, because they were the first ones looking at this very high-risk notion of figuring out how AI would help. As of 6 months to a year ago, we basically said, no, every single team, each of you have enough data, try to think of ways you can use this data to help your customers better. And over this summer, we have a good number of interns working with us, and no less than 5 of us are actually working on this. We have people in the labs team, but also several engineering teams actually have these theoretically engineering problems, but they are all developing these skills. I'm happy to say we have 2 interns actually from USC, and USC has been doing a pretty good job training the students in AI and ML concepts. And that definitely helps us groom this next generation on very realistic problems, which have an impact.
Sorry, we have a great question from Juan, who's asking, do you think the automobile industry at any point in the future could just move completely online, really, I guess, as you were saying,
Juan, that's
to the point where it becomes almost like Uberized?
That's a very good question. And I would like to answer the question with a question in that, do you think that book buying has moved completely online? To go back to Amazon's first business, if you will. And the answer is almost. I think there is some value to physically going and looking at the vehicle. From a service perspective, perhaps not so much. Service, I can definitely see moving online rather rapidly, because if somebody just takes my car and magically fixes it and brings it back, easy peasy. I don't need to go to a dealership. The term mausoleum comes to mind. One of the dealers I was talking to had talked about how sometimes some individuals have put so much effort in making the dealership hang out experience very good because they had no choice. The customer had to come and hang out. So they really invested in making it amazing. I have been to great dealerships with like baristas there taking care of you and stuff. And that's wonderful. But going forward, I think it also opens up the market from a brand perspective. There could be certain dealerships, a new player can step in and say, without much investment, I will be an online only service shop. And therefore I can save costs in having some of those experiences. Not fully, but a lot is going to happen soon.
So another question has to do with kind of, you mentioned these cost reductions of 30%. What was the secret? Anything you can talk about?
Absolutely happy to share, Bhaskar. And I think this is where I talk a lot to students about how doing homework projects versus making actual software, there's some differences. I myself have been humbled multiple times since entering the industry. Amazon, we use AWS for a good amount of our hosting. There's some Google hosting as well. AWS has this notion of reserved instances where you essentially pay up front for a certain amount of space. Unfortunately, people don't tend to that flock as actively as they can. We were able to reach 90% plus reservations, as in more than that amount of our compute power actually comes from reserved instances, which means the costs are much lower than if you just buy an on-demand spike traffic, because we were able to predict certain patterns in our traffic and we were able to make use of it. Yes, it requires team members, it requires spreadsheets and stuff to figure those things out. But the alternative is to buy that skill. And buying that skill, unfortunately, well, costs money. In my conversations with some of the professional optimizing companies, after they analyzed our allocations, the feedback I got was, we normally work with people who have 25% utilization of this RI stuff, so we can help them get better. You guys are 90% plus. We actually can't help you, not easily enough though. I'm pretty sure there's ways to optimize it further. But I think from an academic perspective, Bhaskar, in our courses that we teach at USC, if we make our students a little more aware of some of these cost optimizations, it would be nice to see a homework project saying, okay, under so many dollars, get me X amount of throughput.
Great. Here's another question that's asking about perhaps a far future question. There are some visions for when autonomous vehicles become commonplace, which might even drive a trend away from car ownership. Do you have any thoughts on how the role of a dealership might evolve if this happens?
Absolutely. And this is a very good question, Kwame. We have been thinking a lot about autonomous vehicles, about shared ownership or non-ownership of vehicles. And the current models will no longer apply in such a future. However, as long as vehicles keep moving, they will need to get serviced. Electric vehicles need much less service than internal combustion engine vehicles, of course. But if you're maintaining fleets, you will need service. Dealerships will then need to focus a lot more on servicing those fleet kinds of customers or servicing an Uber driver whose mileage usage is much higher actually on a single vehicle perspective than an average consumer who owns their vehicle. So those patterns will change. I would argue dealers who keep an eye on patterns like this would be the ones who would be ahead of the curve. But things are changing, slow and steady.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Animesh. And thank you all for joining us. We'll resume next week with the next in our webinar series. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.